Thanks,
Well,
David.
shifting gears now to the ongoing energy crisis. Joining me now is Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska, member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and a proud provider of a lot of energy to the American economy. You do a great job in that, Senator. Thank you for being here. Well, let's talk about what's going on.
Good to be on the show.
Last week, the same week that OPEC announces it's cutting production, OPEC Plus, by the way, we get word that Biden's Green Energy Brigade is weighing whether to shrink offshore leasing by as much as 68%. Meanwhile, we're going hat in hand to dirty producers of oil, dirty dictators who are producing dirtier oil than what you can get from the Gulf or from your state. Does that make any sense at all?
David, it's a disaster. And look, the Biden administration has many, many policy disasters. You just talked about a big one, crime. But I think the biggest disaster of all has been their energy policies. And here's why. It cuts across so many key elements of American interests: national security, energy security, environmental policy, jobs, inflation. On every single one of these issues, the Biden administration's energy policies are undermining Americans. And here are the facts. And you mention it because it's continuing. From day one, this administration started by shutting down the production of American energy, making it harder to move American energy through infrastructure, canceling pipelines, going to our financial institutions saying don't invest in American energy. And then when the prices started to rise, they didn't say, hey, let's produce more in the Gulf or more in Alaska. They went around the world, bended knee to the Saudis, to the Venezuelans, heck, even discussions with the Iranians to produce more energy. This is the definition of insane. And what happened last week when OPEC Plus, which by the way is OPEC Plus Russia,
of course,
right? When they came back and said, no, we're actually going to cut 2 million barrels a day after the president literally went to Saudi Arabia on bended knee to ask for more production, and he got 2 million less. It's an embarrassment to our country, and it shows just how weak the Biden administration is from foreign policy. American energy is American strength, and they are unilaterally surrendering it.
Senator, I know you want to talk about Alaskan oil, but I just got to mention the Gulf of Mexico because we get about 15% of our oil from the Gulf of Mexico. We employ 175,000 people there. It's much lower, by the way, in greenhouse emissions than what we get from other basins. We can see it has 50% less emissions than the other basins does. And we get royalties, $22 billion worth of royalties from it. And yet they are thinking of cutting 68% of what we get from the Gulf. I mean, it's just absolutely, we don't have an energy shortage. We have a shortage of leadership to deal with the energy in this country.
You're 100% correct. And, you know, this just adds to the fact, and this is another fact, this president, his administration has offered less leases for energy production in America than any other president since World War II. So you got it exactly right. It's not just the Gulf of Mexico, but in Alaska, we have a project, for example, called the Willow Project. It's the most environmentally sound, lower emission, big energy project in the world. And yet we're still waiting on approvals from the Biden administration on the Willow Project in Alaska. Thousands of jobs. Everybody agrees that it's a really important project, not just for my state, but for the country. Could produce up to 190,000 barrels a day. And what do? They're delaying Willow. They're probably going to cut the Gulf of Mexico. This undermines the environment, but it's also remarkable because they then go hat in hand to dictators who don't like us. And to your point, the Venezuelan production of energy is some of the dirtiest in the world. The Saudis are up there with them, and yet this president and his team continue to go bended knee to beg from dictators. It's an insult to the American people. I'll tell you who else it's an insult to, David, to the great American worker.
Right.
As you just mentioned, all the jobs in Alaska,
who else it's an insult
all the
to,
jobs
Senator?
in the Gulf.
Forgive me, but it's also an insult to the environmentalists, because they're going to the dirtiest producers, and we can produce energy far cleaner. Any kind of fossil fuel, whether you're talking even coal, we can produce cleaner, but certainly oil and, of course, natural gas, one of the cleanest fossil fuels there is by a long stretch. They're cutting back on that as well, and instead going elsewhere. There's just something totally anti-American about what they're doing here. It's against American workers. It's against American production. It's even against filling the coffers of the government. But I don't want to try to get inside of their head. I just know that it's the wrong policy. Senator, thank you so much for being here. I wish we had more time. Good to see you again.
Thank you, David.